Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you may be, and thank you for joining us today for this Dev Talk with Robin West. I just wanted to do a couple of introductions here. This is Stacy Kruzik, and I'm in the developer uh, advocacy group here at Zebra Technologies. The slide you're seeing on the screen right now has to do with our upcoming 2019 AppForm event. For those of you who have attended, or for those of you who have not, this is a global event that we have. I won't be having it in Europe, Australia, China, and Americas this year, where we're going to talk about creation, development, and management of enterprise software and solutions. We have two tracks this year, one for thought leaders and another developer track. So we're excited this year to announce this, and we right now are going to allow people to sign up for any type of interest that they may have in either of the events. If you go to zebra.com/appform, see that URL at the bottom of the screen, you can go ahead and learn a little bit more about the event, some of the logistics, where we're going to be, and sign up for interest. If you have any questions, feel free to email us there as well, and we'd be happy to answer those. A couple of housekeeping items today to note. If you have questions for Robin, we just ask that you wait, hold off on those questions. If you type them in your question box, we'll see them. And then she will respond towards the end of the session on this. As always, we invite all of you to join our developer community to keep up to date on the latest Dev Talks, Dev Podcasts, AppForm, and other events, and as well as see all of our technical information from our experts here at Zebra, and that's at developer.zebra.com. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Robin West. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Stacy, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining today. So we are going to talk about a couple of topics in our discussion today. One of them is on updates to the .NET SDK that includes Xamarin and what we're doing with that. And the other one is around security for printers. We will, when we post timings for the different sections. We do apologize, we don't usually put it in, have two different topics going on these webinars, but we figure there are some definite things that combine with these different topics. Plus, these are good things that we wanted to make sure to share with everyone in our community. So with that being said, I'm going to go on and talk a little bit about the updates that we've done to the .NET SDK that include some Xamarin support within that. As you know, we have had a .NET SDK for about a year and a half now, and we've had a Xamarin SDK for two and a half years. And both of those were independent and separate. The Xamarin SDK being very useful for Android and iOS development in .NET, and the .NET SDK being very useful for PC-based development for our different label and receipt printers, as well as another SDK that we've got for card-based printers. So over the past couple of months, our development teams have done some work to actually combine those SDKs and make them compatible with the different .NET frameworks like .NET Core, .NET Standard, as well as .NET Framework. So that means that the full SDK is available across the different platforms that you might be using and different frameworks you might be using in .NET. If you do a NuGet search for these SDKs, you'll find two SDKs are still posted. The original Xamarin SDK is still there and is still available for you to download. We don't recommend that you use it for new development though, because we're not really going to be adding a whole lot extra to it. It's possible that we'll do bug fixes for it, but at this point it is primarily there for your legacy needs, for applications that you might have already done to use that. Although we are recommending as much as possible that you attempt to switch over to the new SDK, and new development should be using the new SDK called zebraprinter.sdk. But both of them are still available and on NuGet as well as on zebra.com. So just making sure that you guys are aware. You'll also know the version numbers. The new SDK has a higher version number, which should help also make sure that you're using the correct one. So some things to know when you're looking at the different SDKs. The new SDK that we have for .NET is, got a couple of different libraries embedded within there. One of them is for .NET Framework, and it works for Windows 7, 8, and 10 development. The other one, or the other portion of it, works for .NET Standard and Core apps, including Android, iOS, and WPF for .NET Standard. It does not include a UWP library. There was a lot of technical reasons for not being able to support that. It's still something that we hope to include in the future, but there were a number of technical reasons why we were unable to get UWP into this particular release. So that's just something to know as you're doing your development, that you might need to continue to use or pull in .NET Core as frameworks for your applications that might need to go across platforms. In order to, or as part of this update, the Xamarin SDK originally was fairly limited. We had the basic printing connectivity and template management aspects to the SDK, but it was very limited compared to a number of our other SDKs like the Java, Android, and some of the other SDKs that we had out there. Now, because of the fact that we pulled it all in to the .NET Standard SDK, it means that you have the full access to the entire library that is part of that SDK. So I'm going to go through some of the aspects of that so that you can see some of the different pieces and components that are in that new SDK. So if you have downloaded and installed the full SDK from zebra.com, you will notice that, I'm going to pull it up here, there is no longer a Xamarin folder into this SDK. All of the Xamarin components are actually under pc.net. Still a little confusing, and hopefully we can clear that up in the future. But this has all of the libraries that are needed for .NET development for label and receipt printers. And then if you're doing card-based printing, there's the other library there. So when you go into that under the 2.15, you'll notice there are demos for Xamarin, demos for desktop, as well as our print station application, which is our template-based printing application that we have available in source code for both desktop and Xamarin as well. And the libraries are full NuGet packages as well. So if you do take a look at the documentation for them, you'll notice that there are a number of different things in there that you might not have seen in the old SDK. So things like being able to find local printers, which would be your USB-based printers. Now, some of this might be going through the driver, which would not be available on, say, an Android or an iOS. But this does include USB printing for Android for on the go. So if you are printing through an on-the-go cable to one of our printers through Android, these libraries would actually help you cover that. Along with that, we have full control over graphics, variable graphics, font loading, as well as a lot of the security features that are part of the SDK, like being able to get access to different settings and configurations a lot easier than the more manual way of getting settings and configurations in the original Xamarin SDK, as well as being able to do things like wireless security certificates. And within the documentation, there are pretty complete sample codes for that, and I'll go into more around certificates in a later portion of this particular session, but wanted to show you that so that you're aware of some of the different components and new aspects to the SDK that are available. So when you are switching to, if you are converting code from the old SDK to this new one, there are a couple of things you're going to have to change and modify. Most of it's going to be the same, but if you remember working with the old SDK, we used a class called .current in order to handle switching between iOS and Android at compile time. And with this new SDK, we do not need to do that. So the .current class would have to be removed from your classes in order to work with the new SDK. Another change is that while in the old SDK you needed to use the dependency service for some of the discovery, especially Bluetooth discovery, now for all the Bluetooth and USB connections, you are going to have to use dependency service when you're working with Xamarin Forms. Because a lot of those components are very hardware driven, and I'll show you some of the code for that as well. And then for printer discovery, we don't have the discovery event handler anymore, so you do have to implement a discovery handler yourself. So those are some of the major changes from the old libraries to this new one. And some of the ways that works are, I pulled up the demo that is actually included within the SDK. And if you're, say, looking at the connectivity demo, which is one of the more basic ones up here, it's some UI components in the code. But when you're actually starting to work with actually handling the connection, you'll notice that it is starting to call the dependency service in order to get a Bluetooth connection or get a USB connection. This wasn't required in the past, but because this is such a hardware-driven aspect to the connections, it has had to be kind of broken out. So you do have to implement this in the code for the different native projects. So this is the Forms project here, where you find these iConnection managers, and then they have to be implemented actually in the native projects. So I'm going to pull up the Android. And we have a connection manager implementation within the Android project. And within there is where it actually goes ahead and creates a Bluetooth connection, find the Bluetooth printers, all handled within here. It's fairly simple, and the documentation is straightforward for it. But if you are working with Xamarin Forms, you'll have to consider how that is going to be handled between the different projects. You'll also notice that the .current phrasing in these particular projects is completely gone and is no longer needed in there. So I hope that is helpful for everyone understanding what is needed to be done to change your code. Otherwise, it's actually pretty similar. Most of the classes are going to work the same, going to be implemented the same. Just making a couple of these code changes will get you moved over to the new SDK once you've loaded it up into your application. So the next section that I'm going to talk about a little bit about is printer security. Printer security is something that we've made sure to make a high priority at Zebra. And we always have, but especially lately, it's become more and more important that you consider the security of the entire system. We know that a lot of you as software developers are being tasked with making sure that your applications are handling security in a very strategic and straightforward way, and that your customers are happy and satisfied with the security that your applications are providing. And certainly if any IT administrators are out there as well, knowing how and what you need to do to secure your printers is really important as well. We even just last week there was um, a confirmed hack on 50,000 printers. It was more of a joke, some sort of a prank that somebody did, but somebody actually went out there and connected to a whole bunch of office printers and told people to subscribe to a YouTube channel. It's pranky, but the actual article goes into the fact that there is code out there, there are hackers out there who are willing and able to go in and attack printers because it is actually a potential way for people to get into different systems. Can't do much, especially when you're talking about office printers. Okay, you print off something silly and funny, or you print off something like that. There are certain things that, as a hacker, you could do to potentially damage the printer. Not as quite as much of an issue with zero printers, but still potential that somebody could figure out something to do to damage it. But if you think about a printer on a production line, or a printer in a police car, what kinds of potential risks are there? It's a lot more than you might think, even for an office printer. Um, changing a line in somebody's file, yes, could cause a lot of issues from a corporate standpoint, but shutting down operations for a company by messing with their production line printers could cost millions of dollars. So there's a lot of reasons for being very aware of what the potential opportunities and or issues might come out of printer security and what you need to do. Now, I'm not a expert on security. That's not my thing of handling it, but I do know enough to know what you guys need to be aware of, and can point you in the direction of different components that different things that you can dig into more and find out more about what you can do. So there are three primary things that you guys can do as software developers to help improve the security of the printers and for yourselves as well as for your customers. The big one that everyone talks about are secure communications. So communications to the printers and from the printers, you want to consider methods for, encrypting those communications, making sure they're secure in a number of different fashions. We know that our customers want to communicate with our printers in, different ways, depending a lot on the situation and the use case. So if they're communicating to the printer over Wi-Fi, make sure they're using secure Wi-Fi. Make sure that the printers have the correct certs on them. If you're talking to the printer over Bluetooth, don't use Bluetooth insecure. It's just opening yourself up for the possibility of somebody else coming in and using that printer and doing things to that printer that you don't have any control over. So being able to set the printers up to have higher security levels. If it's a Bluetooth 2 or 3, put in the pin numbers. If it's one of the higher level ones, make sure that it's using the higher security levels within it. And those types of things that you can do pretty easily, and it doesn't hamper your customer once it's fully set up to just make sure that those communications are secured. Access control. There's a couple of different ways of looking at access control, but one of the biggest and simplest things you can do is a lot of times, a lot of customers are only really communicating to the printer over, one channel, Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or USB. But by default, the printers actually have a lot of communication channels that are fully open. And in the past, this was, more useful for the convenience of our customers. and in the future we may end up changing it. But right now it means that there's a lot of communication channels that are open that a customer might not want to have open or might not even know that they have open to the printer. Say you put the printer on your network, either Wi-Fi or Ethernet. A lot of customers don't realize that any user on that network can then go in and change the settings of that printer by just going to a web page, and make many changes to the printer just by doing that. And they don't realize that that's there. Some things that you can do to block that are to block off that particular type of communication. And the other one is changing the actual password for settings changes. Most of the printers, the smaller printers like the mobile printers, the desktop printers, you don't have to use the password to change the settings on the menu of the printer as you're looking at it. But you do if you go to the printer web page. A lot of the tabletop printers, you do need to actually use the password to change the settings on the printer as you're standing in front of it. So by default, that password is 1234. Pretty simple. But there's different ways that you can go ahead and change that password, or ask your customers to change that password in order to improve that security so that not just anyone can go in and change the settings. As you've probably been aware if you've worked with our printers for a while, a big complaint that a lot of customers have is people going in and changing the settings, and they don't necessarily realize there's ways that they could actually prevent some of that. So these are some things to be aware of, and I'll show you a little bit of code on how to do some of this as well. And then just making sure that your firmware is updated both for yourselves and your customers. We do come out with security patches and new firmware updates for security on a fairly regular basis. And you do want to make sure that you're continuing to use the latest, especially for the last couple of years. We've put out a number of different updates to the printer firmware, and many of those have been to fix either fix security issues or to just improve the security of the printers in general in a lot of different ways. So as I was showing you a little bit before, there are some things in the SDK, both for .NET as well as for Java, that will help you in managing a lot of this. But there's also a guide that we have online, and I'll pull it up, that goes through a lot of the more detailed aspects, a lot more than I'm going to go into on this conversation. But it really talks about what it means to secure a printer, or really any peripheral, and different methods, best practices for what you need to do. I've gone through some of it from the standpoint, from a really high level standpoint of what you as a software developer might want to or need to do in order to secure the printers. But this goes into a little bit more details. And it goes through different models of printers and what potential things you can do depending on the models. A lot of the older models would only allow you to secure and either block or allow communications on a very small subset of channels. Especially with LinkOS 5, which came out last year, we allow a lot more openness to being able to lock down a lot of other aspects, as well as provide security certificates for a lot of other communication channels within the printer. And this goes through that in very specific detail. It also talks about the how to turn on and off each individual service, as well as near the end it goes through how to handle certificate files. And one of the things to know about certificate files within Xero printers is if you're using some of the standard certificate formats, we can't just, unfortunately, we're unable to just load a P12 file into the printer and have the printer understand it and use it. In order to work with most of the more common certificate file formats, we need to essentially break it down into 3 component parts. the different keys, the authority chain, and have those as separate files that get loaded into the printer. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do it yourself, or you can use the SDK in order to handle actually breaking that down. And in fact, in the sample code on the newest SDK, it goes through breaking it down into those 3 separate files. So this would be the base file on the client cert, and then the CA chain cert. So those 3 base files, so it goes through breaking those down from the P12 or PEM file and loading them onto the printer. So this hopefully will be helpful if you ever do need to update certificates on the printer, or help your customers with doing that, and getting those updated with those different certificates. There are a lot of different things that you can secure with certificates, from Wi-Fi communications to some of the web-based communications that are capable on the printer. You can also potentially use these files. You can also potentially use these files to do certain things for yourselves. So say you want to be able to enable certain functionality within your application based on the printers that are being used. So if you want to be able to, say, charge a customer for a certain functionality within your application based on the number of printers they use, you can essentially load what's called an NRD file onto the printer. These NRD files are hidden, but if you know the file name, you can request it. You can't do anything other than request the file name. You can't open it. You can't do anything with it. But that does allow you a way to actually verify that you've essentially keyed that printer to your application. It's one of the methods that we handle for doing certain strategic applications ourselves for our customization group, to be able to basically lock customers in, or not lock customers in, but lock the printer to a specific application by using these NRD files. So that's one thing that you can do, is load an NRD file onto the printer with the information that as part of the file name that you need, is some sort of a keyed file name that would essentially let you know in your application that it is keyed to your application. So there's some different things you can do with that, just some options that you might want to know about. Also, so go through that guide, definitely, if you're interested in security. We also have a demo app on our GitHub account that shows some of the different things you can do to essentially lock in, and that's not the right, it's not the right project, to essentially lock in the different settings of the printer in order to make sure that the communications to that printer are the ones that you want to have. And it's the EAI demo app. And within that app, it does allow you to turn on and off the different communication methods, and set the Bluetooth security modes, and do that sort of thing within that application, within that sample code, to help you figure out different things that you might want to lock down and do to secure, at least from the standpoint of access to the different components and different communication channels of the printer. So hopefully that will be useful. We are planning on creating a version of this for .NET as well, because currently speaking, this is in Java. But just let us know at some point if this would be interesting to you, to have some sort of a basic security demo samples so you can figure out the different aspects of how to secure the printer. So we do have a couple of other resources that you might want to take a look at. There is a site called Lifeguard on zebra.com. And while it is labeled Lifeguard for Android, we post all security alerts on here that might affect Zebra devices. So the anything that might affect Android devices as well as our printers are actually posted on this site. So if you have heard about a security issue or you want to continue to be aware of different security alerts that come in, you can come onto this page and this site to find out what's going on and what our response is and what we're going to do and any updates that we might have to firmware in order to fix those potential issues. We also have a page called Print Secure, which talks about different things you can do to secure the printers, and a program that we have to help you and our customers secure printers. But within this page, it has the administration guide that I was showing earlier. It also has a bunch of configuration files, administration files. And these are downloadable files that have the different settings that would be used with that particular printer to potentially lock down a lot of the communication channels and potentially secure that printer from a lot of the different issues that could be coming in. So if you're looking at the ZD420, I guess that's not pulling it up, but it will load up a file that you can take a look at. You can modify if you want to, but then you can actually use that to load it onto the printer and lock that printer down to the needs that you have for it. So hopefully that is useful to you. And again, I do recommend that you go through this Print Secure Administration Guide, and I've got a link in the slide deck as well. And hopefully you'll find it useful to figure out the different methods that you can do to secure the printer and provide more secure communications to the printer. And that is it for my presentation. If anyone has questions, please feel free to put them into the question area, and I will attempt to answer them as much as I can.
That was great, Robin. Thanks so much. Does anybody have any questions? I'm not seeing anybody as of this moment. We'll remain on for a little bit here to see if anybody has anything to ask. Okay, excellent. Well, thank you all again for joining us this month for our DevTalk. Again, remember App Forum registration will be open soon for our Europe event and the other regional events following that, but you can sign up for interest at zebra.com/appforum. And as always, please feel free to join our developer community at developer.zebra.com. And we thank you for attending today and look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.